Hi and welcome to the first episode of Dunhill's podcast. You're listening to me, Fenn, journalist and director, and in a few minutes I'll be joined by Mark Weston, creative director of Dunhill, and London-based musician Moses Boyd. This podcast really all stems from a desire to celebrate and explore collaborations of art and artists in our everyday life. But I don't mean that in a lofty sense. As a brand, Dunhill has always been rooted in music culture. Take it back to the 70s, and Dunhill had its very own vinyl album, brilliantly named A Touch of Class. Throughout the decades, the brand has been immersed in music culture, from providing suits to the likes of Frank Sinatra to Cody Radical, to collaborating with artists on each show's soundscape. It makes sense then that today we're going to talk to Moses Boyd, London-based drummer, composer and producer. With his work influenced by jazz, grime and electronic, there's no wonder why or how Mark felt so intrigued by this guy's work. In 2017, Moses found himself creating an original audio track exclusively for Dunhill's Paris Fashion Week men's show. So Mark Weston and Moses Boyd, how are you both?
I'm very good.
Very well, thank you.
So today is all about music. I want to hear what is on your playlist at the moment.
Well, Mark very kindly lent me some records, actually. The band's called Sounds of Liberation, and it's kind of like free jazz, funk, DIY, almost like Strata East, that sort of period, which is like my favourite period. And it's quite funny because I'd just seen Gary Bartz on Saturday at the festival, who, I don't know, maybe we'll get into him later, but he's like one of my heroes. I wouldn't be making music, I don't think, if it was for Gary Bartz. And it just kind of completed a circle for me, actually. So I've been kind of in that world at the moment.
Is that where you were late this morning? Because you were in this world.
I was in that world. Jazz musician time. Yeah.
I was listening to the Giles Peterson show from last Saturday, so I was just mentioning to catch up on that when I can. You know, I've been listening to him for many years in terms of, you know, when he was first on Kiss FM, and I've kind of grown up with listening to him, and he's been an educator for me, and, you know, got me into, I guess it's that inquisitive mindset that's taken me down different avenues, and so yeah, I love what he does.
And it's that inquisitive mindset that is kind of like where this relationship began between you guys.
I guess it began summer season.
Yeah, summer 19. Yeah.
19, yeah. I was invited to just attend the Dunhill fashion show in Paris, and after the show we were having dinner, and I was sat opposite Mark and his wife Sophie. And I remember just talking to Mark about music, you know, which is, I mean, something I do and I like to do. But it was really interesting because I remember Mark mentioned Max Roach. And for me, it's like, if anyone mentions Max Roach, you know, for those that maybe don't know, he's a famous drummer. He's one of my favourite drummers. It kind of instantly was like, okay, this is like interesting, you know, like, you know, the creative director.
You were like, what am I?
You know, there are certain names in certain fields. If you mention, it's just like, okay, this is going to be fun. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, we had a great conversation and kind of just kept in contact. Just like, this is an interesting person. I'm an interesting person, hopefully, you know, and we just had a really good time just talking about music, art, London, life, you know, and we kind of kept in touch. And I'd just go check in at Dunhill every now and again. We talk about more music and stuff. And then it kind of just snowballed into, I guess, a working relationship where I was fortunate enough to work on the music for the last 2 seasons of the Dunhill show, creating music to go with the walk and, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
And now you're going into the 3rd season.
Now I'm going to the 3rd, yeah.
Take us back to that moment where you first played, Mark, what you were going to play on the show.
In my head, I guess I'd never written music for a runway show. I have a brother that's in fashion, that makes clothes. So I'm not anywhere near that knowledgeable of fashion, but I just kind of understand a little bit of how it works. So in my head, I was seeing this whole scene of, like, you know, 6 to 8 minutes, different looks coming out, and I almost saw it like this sonata. So I remember showing up to Mark's office with like an 8-minute composed piece of like, yeah, then it moves through this section here and and it was just funny because looking back on it, it's like how we now work is so different. Like now I'll send Mark like a 10-second idea and he's like, yeah, I really like that in that, and we'll build on that. But it's actually just quite funny looking back. I had a whole suite composed, and Mark was like, oh my gosh, like I wasn't expecting this much this soon, you know.
I guess it's kind of down to kind of our organic relationship and how that's kind of blossomed through just conversations. And I remember us talking about the collection, and then the first time you came in, and obviously it's probably the second time we're probably meeting in that kind of capacity, and for you to produce this body of work, basically, I was just blown away that I wasn't expecting that complete with so many different layers in it. So it was like, I was like, whoa, this is quite incredible.
I guess for me, it's very easy to kind of see beginning to end in a piece, or maybe not. It's just I'm used to sort of thinking of it like that, but I kind of had to kind of get you out of that way of thinking and sort of maybe put myself in Mark's world a bit, where it's like there's these looks, there's this emotion, there's this mood, and trying to find where that matches in certain like qualities. Maybe it's like a synth sound I've used, maybe it's like a drum part, maybe it's a tempo, and like really kind of simplifying it, not in a sort of intellectual way, but like just stripping it back to be like, okay, well, what's important here? Do you know what I mean? How does this reflect what Mark is trying to do with the show? You know, because I think I have a very easy way of kind of overcomplicating things musically sometimes, and it was really interesting. You know, we'd go downstairs and he'd show me these mood boards of like, you know, pictures, design ideas, cloths, fabric, and then I'm thinking, okay, cool, and then I'm listening to my thing and seeing all my music and seeing all of this depth, and being like, well, to me the focus is the show, the clothes and the runway and that whole setup, and it's like, how do I support all of that? Do you know what I mean? And it was just really us kind of just bouncing between the music, being like, oh, I really like that, or me playing it to Mark and kind of seeing where his ears jump up. Okay, there's a little note, he liked that part, okay, cool, I could work with that. Or developing maybe one idea within a section of maybe 4 sounds or rhythms or something, and then just kind of really extrapolating. For a long time it was like I was moving things around, I was putting that here, taking that out, loads of different versions, and you know, which is kind of actually how I like to work. I don't like to set on something until I'm sure.
Obviously it's very clear why this collaboration works so well. Listening to you both now, it's very clear. You're both pretty meticulous when it comes to collaborating, so how did you know at the very beginning that this was the right move?
Be honest, Moses.
No, you know what? It's interesting because I guess I've collaborated in a lot of spheres, and it's always just like a feeling, really. It's like some of them on paper, you'll look at it and it's like, why did Moses do that? But it always kind of goes back to just how it feels, you know. And on like a human level, it's not about just the music, the brand, or whatever. It's like, do I feel I can contribute to something, or do I feel I can kind of add myself into their world? That's kind of always my thing. And if I don't feel I can do that, I'm very open to be like, I'm not the person. Do you know what I mean? Whoever it is, whatever the fee is, I'm not very much that person. It's like, but this was something I had never done before, and I was really open to trying it. And also just talking to Mark, it's like I can see it's a very genuine thing.
I think not having an agenda other than, I'm really interested about this person, I like what they do, you know. I try and have that with collaborations, that it's got to feel genuine. I think you use that same word. I think if you're genuine about a connection, and you're going to give the best of it, because it's going to be more heartfelt, it's going to be something that you're really into. The moment you're forced into a situation, you know, and that's not necessarily, you know, in a kind of a meeting scenario, it can be in other things in your kind of, you know, your kind of working career, but I think to create something quite special, you've got to be quite open about it, and you've got to, and that's why I love working with Moses, that as a creative, you know, I have huge respect for him as a musician. You know, I'm not a musician, but having a conversation and seeing where things can go, but also leaving space, leaving kind of a, sure, well, what do you think? These are kind of what's in my head. And I think it's that back and forth, bouncing back and forth, and just seeing where something can go, and kind of leaving it slightly organic. You know, and I think to some people, you know, I'm very structured as a person, but I fight against that structure where creatively you've got to let things breathe a bit, or let it percolate. Just sit with it for a little while. Don't try and make or force it to be something.
So Mark, none of your family worked in fashion. How did you get here?
So I never thought I'd end up doing what I'm doing, actually. I was always really into art, but I never thought I'd be in fashion. I was really obsessed with kind of graphics when I was at school. Did very well at it, and that was, for me, it was like, right, that's it. That's kind of my passion. I think I loved the precision with it, but also the experimentation with it, you know. And as I kind of went on to kind of further study it at A-levels and then onto a foundation course, I met a group of people that, through friends of mine, that were into music, and a music that I'd never really heard before. So that kind of opened me up to that. But that's a segue onto that. But going to a foundation course, and which is basically a year's course where you can experiment a week in a different discipline. So it might be a week in photography, a week in fashion and textiles, a week in graphics, a week in fine art, to see where your natural gravity is towards a certain craft or a certain application, let's say, or process. And I found it hugely valuable. Whereas when I went onto the course, I did the graphics. I was quite excited about being doing the graphics week, and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. It's the tutor wasn't very inspiring, or necessarily maybe what I thought graphics was about. So it's not. But I think it's having someone who's leading into a certain craft, and them either being inspiring or not, kind of sways you into your interest in it. So after that, I was still. I think it's still like I am today. I'm very open-minded. I think I'm probably a bit too relaxed, maybe for some people. But it was great to be able to then go into a different discipline, and I did a week in fashion and textiles, and the tutor there was incredible. A woman called Jane Howarth, and she was just hugely inspiring. And as I did the work through that and specialised, and and talked about the next points, which were going to be degree level, and she was suggesting, Bristol is a great university, it's got a great music scene. So even from that age, I think the musical part of influencing me and what I was about, I think, was already starting to form quite well, and it was super exciting. And I think for me, it's never really left. It's always been a connection where I can't separate the two. And we think about kind of style cultures, and particularly British style cultures, all the very cliched ones, but they're never devoid of music. It's style, but there's always a musical movement that goes with it. So it's always fascinated me.
Would you say that these style cultures are a massive influence to each of your collections?
For me, yes. I think music comes into everything I do, either in a more minimal way or a very kind of strong way. I think that for me is the really interesting part of starting to look back at British culture, really. And Moses and I talk about it quite a lot, actually. And being, being a creative director for a British luxury brand, it's important that there has that. It's a grounding, I think, for me, is that it's real. It comes from somewhere real. So those points, I think, yes, it's back to a moment and a feeling of a certain musical, genre or movement or artist. But then the association of, stylistically, I guess, what that connection was. And I think that's a super interesting part, and playing with them, contradicting them, whether it be sort of Sloane Rangers, but then there's also Terrace Casuals, which actually had similar kind of approaches to dress, but one was being provocative and subversive, another one was being more conformist. So I kind of loved that dynamic, and I think having contradiction is a very British thing. What's exciting for me also is to talk about it and link it into design and link it into the world of a luxury company. For me, it's quite unexpected. I didn't do it because I thought, let's do something unexpected. It just felt natural to be able to talk about Britishness or British style culture or references or codes in a new way that the house had never done before. So for me, it was like, we're going to new world. We're going to a new territory here, and to kind of probably when people start thinking about it and think about this kind of conversation today, Dunhill music, I didn't really what's the connection kind of thing. And I like that. I like the fact of people being a bit confused by it. And in a way, because it's not a natural thing, and actually, but as we've talked today, it's so natural. But it's just about being able to kind of to showcase it, to be able to kind of have conversations about it. That becomes super exciting.
Well, on that note, I kind of want to quickly wrap it up with some of the pioneers, the musical pioneers that Dunhill has worked with. Going from Frank Sinatra to Mike Skinner to Elvis Presley to Moses Boyd. Talk to us, why do you think that this is?
They're people that I discovered in the archive that had this connection with Dunhill, and I think it probably at the time it was more the connection to quality, to a moment when maybe the brand was quite hot for them at that time, and something they wanted to be part of. I think it is a quality part that when I talk about, when I discover a bit more of the whole Frank Sinatra, and I found his tailoring ledger from New York, from I think it was 82 to 85. but his love and passion for the brand to creating something beautiful and was kind of stylish and timeless. And then obviously Elvis with his lighter, his roller gas lighter. So I kind of also look at that. I mean, I don't know I don't really know their association other than what I can see from looking at it through my eyes now.
Yeah.
So I think it's just super interesting that those people have been part of the brand's history, and these people who are rebels almost, or pioneers, about people who want to change something or have their own insistence and an intuition to kind of change something. So, and I think that for me is what what I find really inspiring about the company's history and our kind of as Alfred Dunhill first started off, this innovation of looking forward and change, but doing because you believe in it and you can see what can come out of it. But also then coming to today and working with Mike Skinner came to the show and I had a great conversation with him as well, and obviously working with Moses. I think I kind of put it down to a like-minded kind of collaboration with who we are and where we're going. And building on that.
Moses, did you know about
no
this? You didn't?
No. Yeah, it's interesting for me because Frank Sinatra being a legend, obviously Mike Skinner, do you know what I mean? It was cool meeting Mike. That was the show, the first show I went to and stuff. But I guess it is kind of what Mark was saying, just that like-minded thing, and we often talk about it a lot. And Mark was very open early on to be he wants to build this community that is very organic and very, not that there's for any other reason. It's just the organic community. And it was quite interesting working with Mark and then going to the first show and then just talking to him about people that I'm connected with. So, people like James Messiah, Obong JR, Koji Radical. And I think what was funny, last year I had a moment where we were in Paris and I showed up, me and my fiance, and I sat down next to her. I turned to the left and Robin Katz was there. And we had never mentioned about I knew Robin or he knew Robin.
Yeah.
And I used to play with bands in Robin, and he's an art dealer and a jazz musician. And it was so why? Of course. One of them sort of light bulb, of course you're here. And then also Reuben James, a very, very, very good friend of mine. I think he came in to do a fit-in the week I went to see Mark a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to me seeing the vision that Mark was talking about kind of happening. I never imagined, not never, but it's just the fact that my close friend Reuben James is going in for a fit-in the week before I arrive, and Robin's there and they're doing something with James Messiah. It's really cool, and it's testament, I guess, to the brand, like what we were sort of saying with Elvis or Frank Sinatra. Those are giants of their time. So it's well, how are you sort of doing that now? Do you know what I mean? And that's why it's so good to see Reuben or Robin and James Messiah or whoever, Mike Skinner, Reggie Yates, and all of these people. So it's interesting.
And people who genuinely love the brand.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting for me to see, and and for you almost to surmise it. That is the purpose of it. It is really, it should be genuine, and I mean that wholeheartedly. And I think it's kind of testament to, I guess, how we've worked together and how all these different connections have come together, and it's 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
And we'd have a lot of those conversations. And that's what I'm really excited and also really happy to see that we're managing to do it on a very human level. And it should be about that. It should be, I think being a fashion, being in the world of fashion, let's say, I think it was very important to me that it wasn't misconstrued as, okay, they're jumping on Moses Boyd, who's super cool at the moment. Okay, right. Okay, so that's why they made the connection. It's it's not. And that's what's really important to me. It's about people and their output. It's meritocracy. It's kind of doing things that you really believe in. It's coming back to that point I was saying about in our history of having Frank Sinatra and Elvis. They're pioneers. In different ways and in different times. But I think it is about that. It's about doing something because you believe in it, doing something because it's right. Doing something with quality because you believe in it, and working hard. That's another part of that I really believed in, and my parents were very keen to kind of drill into me of, you're not going to get anything for free. So you've got to work your ass off to kind of get to where you want to get. Whatever you want to do, you do. But you've got to put the time in, and that's always stuck with me. And I again, try and teach that to my teams as well, that, you know, come on, let's do this. Let's kind of let's think hard about this, and when you're doing something in a very passionate way, it's not like work, or it's not hard, or, you know, the graft is you love doing it, you know, so you will spend 12 hours doing it, but you love doing it, and you know, you get a result at the end of it, and you move and you adapt, and so it's great to kind of sort of bring it back to the kind of this community idea. Is I think that's been a connection as well of it's got to be human, it's got to be, you know, and that's what I love, and where it goes, we're just exploring it, and again, back to that kind of openness and not super structured. I love that, and it takes different forms.
Final thing before we close out, you're both incredible creatives. What is the one thing that you hope people get from your craft?
I'd say honesty, because I think honesty encompasses a lot of things. Like, if there's a record I worked on really quickly, you can hopefully hear that. If it took a lot, you know, like, honestly, I don't like to put out things, just anything. Statements are, I don't like to just say things for the sake of saying it. If I'm doing this, there's usually a reason behind it, you know what I mean? And I think if you genuinely like and support what I do, it's like, it's a journey. Do you know what I mean? I'm not the same person I was when I released Riley and Shuffle. So if I show up with a country album one day, know it was real. Do you know what I mean? That's it, really.
So how do you feel that working together has not changed you, but kind of has it given you any different ways of thinking about something, or has it taken on a different path or an explorative something that you didn't really expect before?
Yeah, it's definitely given me like another path, but I think it's probably reinforced more what I knew but didn't feel as strong, kind of things I was talking about before, where it's like, you know, other people may not get it and may not see it. And when I say see it, not like there's some master plan where I'm like, oh, if I do this with Dunhill, it will lead to this. Like, no, it's like things work because if you're genuine and you have integrity behind them, something will happen. Do you get me?
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's kind of not changed, but reinforced that notion in my head where it's like, you know, you don't have to have this master plan all the time. Like, sometimes intuition and your belief and your interest and that inquisitiveness you have. Like, I was at my 4-year-old nephew's birthday party this weekend. I was just watching him play and I was like, man, like, I want that again. Do you know what I mean? And I'm always kind of chasing, like, I gave him a remote control car, how excited and how new and fresh this was to him. I'm always trying to find that in a record, in a collaboration, in a show. And, you know, my band get so annoyed with me. I'm like, no, we're changing it this time and we're doing this, and, you know, and I'm like, I'm always trying to keep that thing. And I think collaborations like this have sort of reminded me of that. Like, you should really be involved. For me, you should be involved in things because you love it and you're trying to challenge yourself and you're trying to find new inspiration in avenues and areas you may not have. Because that's the thing, I don't think on paper I would have done something like this. Maybe on paper is not the right way to say it, but I was open enough to try it. And by trying it, it's like opened me up to so many things, to even meeting you and, you know, and going to different places and seeing different things and seeing different worlds, where now I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Even to, like, you couldn't make it, but like my show at Fabric.
I was really frustrated, you know, I couldn't be there,
But like, you know, even just the way I staged that, I was like, okay, well, this is no more just a gig. Like, I'm thinking about these Dunhill shows and how they, you know, how it's a whole production. And like, I'm like, okay, well, I've got to work out the lighting and, you know, the staging and all, like, you know, little things. Like, I'm seeing everything more like in a bigger picture, where like music is just one part.
Did you give them a catwalk?
Kind of. Yeah. The video will soon drop. I had these like marching drummers kind of processing, you know. But yeah, you know, and I think that's what doing these things have kind of not changed, just reinforced, I would say.
Yeah. What I'm hoping that people get from visually where Dunhill's going is the sense of being meticulous, being really hard on yourself to kind of get that, not perfection because that doesn't exist, but something that reflects who you are and that you really believe in.
So since this podcast is all about music, I kind of want you to choose artists, tracks, go-to tracks on your playlist.
Ooh, okay. Aptly, I'd have to start with Max Roach, because I guess that's kind of what binded us, really. Or not bind, that sounds really harsh. That's what intrigued both of us. Well, how we both met. So I'd say maybe like Max Roach. Let's do like Drums Also Waltz. It's like a really famous solo drum piece by the master Max Roach. Mark gave me this record by Angela Bofill. Yeah, the album's Angel of the Night, track People Make the World Go Round, and I was just listening to it yesterday. It's such like it's just a great dance floor tune. What else? I would add the Lovers Rock classic written by my friend Dennis Bovell, Silly Games, sung by Janet Kay. I don't know if we've talked about, maybe we have. I'm not sure if we've talked about this song, but it's very important for me, just being like, you know, of West India descent. And Lovers Rock I find quite interesting because although it sounds very similar to reggae in some respects and it might be seen as Jamaican, it was a very British revolution. Like, you know, if I talk to like my aunties and uncles and grandparents that were in the West Indies, they don't really deal with Lovers Rock. They were like, well, we had reggae, we had mento, we had ska. Lovers Rock was you guys' thing. And I feel that's really important because that's like my parents' generation, and what they were going through is summarized as a very important space in time, whether it's like musically, how people were getting together to dance, sound system wise, and all of that.
Brilliant track list. And yourself?
I first got into, I guess, kind of music really when I was younger through a friend of mine whose brother and his friend were doing just a musical night down in Maidstone in Kent, which you'd never expect at the time. This is going back into, this is like 91, 92. And for me it was like, it just made me feel alive, where I was discovering music through these two guys, a guy called Richard Saysell and Julian Ireland, that I'd never heard before. It just blown my mind. I was thinking, where does this music come from? How does it even exist? How does, you know? And you start to see the covers of these albums, and you're like, oh my god, even that's another whole incredibly visual and, you know, and inspirational and exciting world of how do these even exist? You know, so one of the first things that I'd heard there, which I'd never heard before, was the Brazilian artist Joyce, and it was a moment where Rare Groove had kind of been going for maybe a year or so, I guess. And it was sounds basically were happening in London, but this was coming down to a small town in Kent that, you know, that wasn't really connected to that kind of sound, or but a few people started playing out, and it wasn't a scene at all, but it was really exciting to be listening to things in your own hometown that was people were talking about in London, and, you know, it was a bit of a scene. So it felt really special, and almost that it felt like I was part of something that no one else really knew about in that in the town. So I kind of, you know, I heard this track by Joyce, which was I'm going to pronounce it completely wrong because I don't speak Portuguese, but Aldeia Jogum, I think it's called. It was just so exquisite. It's beautiful. Her vocals, the production on it, the instruments, the guitars. It was so sparse and so beautiful. I just fell in love with it. So a lot of my musical knowledge is kind of that, and also kind of listening to the radio and sort of pirate radio and Giles Peterson. Kind of really opened my knowledge to it. So then it became like copious amounts of lists of trying to kind of, making books of, of an address book with all these different albums, all the tracks that, you know, I wanted to kind of pick up. So that's one of my all-time kind of favourites. I guess going on from there, and again, something that kind of blew me away when I first heard it, which is obviously Atmosphere, Dancing Down Space. And then the fact that actually it came from England was just like, it kind of just like, how does this happen? But it's like, oh my God, this is incredible coming from England. So that I kind of, I've loved for ever since I heard it. Another one, which is a bit kind of my style really, and we talked about it before, is I think when you're collecting records and sounds, you can get in really deep, and you can get deeper and deeper and down a rabbit hole, and you can kind of get lost in the world of the records can go in different levels, where it can be something that's very popular and very easy to get hold of to something incredibly rare. Now the rarity can also mean that it may not get into your head, but because of its pressing, or because of its associations, or because of its connections, it's super collectible, so that pushes the price up. So it's quite interesting looking at, from that angle. But for me, I like a charity shop diamond, I think, if is a good way to put it. I love looking at, again, people who have put out music that are very good, maybe commercially, but I kind of like finding the kind of tension in something kind of really quite rare or unknown, like the Sounds of Liberation album that Moses was mentioning earlier, that I lent him and we both really love. But then also finding on the other side a Carpenter. I heard a track by the Carpenters, and this is one I shared with you. And to discover the kind of, it's a track called All I Can Do. It's on an album called Ticket to Ride, so it's a really easy, you can pick it up anywhere almost. But to discover that going through, when you're finding someone who's iconic, who's got someone like Karen Carpenter, who's got an incredible voice, but she was a wicked drummer. Yeah. She's a wicked drummer. I mean, you know her prowess better than me. So to kind of discover something like that, and it's a really short track, and I always play it several times over because it's just too short. I mean, all the best tracks aren't they? So I kind of love discovering that, and that's kind of one of my all-time kind of discoveries.
And you discovered that in a charity shop?
Yeah.
Great.
And just thinking, this is interesting. And I'd heard it through someone playing it, and it was like, oh my God, okay. And I found it in the charity shop, so I was like, brilliant, So kind of, and I loved that, the fact of a record isn't necessarily great because of its rarity. It can be just as good if it's widely accessible and cheap. It's essentially, but if it's a quality track, it's a quality track.
I think we're going to make a playlist of all those tracks so that people can listen to them or go to them as soon as they've finished this podcast, which is about now.
Yeah.
Thank you
Brilliant.
so much.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to talk to you both.
Likewise.